What if the greatest truth about your existence was never destroyed, only hidden? What if the reason so many people feel lost, anxious, disconnected, and endlessly searching is not because they are broken, but because they have forgotten something they were never meant to forget? For thousands of years, humanity has searched for meaning through religion, through philosophy, through success, through relationships, through knowledge. Yet despite all this searching, millions of people still carry the same quiet feeling inside, a feeling that something essential is missing. The ancient Vedic sages believed they knew why. They taught that there was once a truth so powerful that understanding it could completely transform the way a person sees life, suffering, fear, death, and even reality itself. A truth about who you really are. A truth so profound that if fully remembered, many of the fears that control human life would begin to lose their power. But over time, humanity became obsessed with the outer world and slowly forgot the inner one. The search continued, but the direction became wrong. People started looking everywhere except the one place where the answer existed. Tonight, we are going to uncover the hidden truth that the Vedas refused to let disappear. A truth that has survived thousands of years. A truth hidden beneath every identity, every belief, every fear, and every story you have ever told yourself. And by the end of this journey, you may realize that what you have been searching for your entire life was never far away. It was hidden in the one place you were never taught to look. The greatest lie ever taught is that you are only this person. The most successful illusion ever created was not convincing people that truth does not exist. It was convincing them that they already know who they are. From the very beginning of life, a story is placed upon you. Before you are old enough to understand yourself, the world begins describing you. You are given a name, a family, a culture, a religion, a nationality, a personality, a history. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin collecting these things until they become the answer to the question, who am I? You spend years building an identity from everything the world hands you. You learn what people expect from you. You learn what makes others praise you. You learn what makes others reject you. Little by little, you create a version of yourself that can survive in the world. And eventually, you become so familiar with that version that you stop questioning it. You point to your face and say, "This is me." You point to your memories and say, "This is me." You point to your achievements, your failures, your relationships, your beliefs, and your experiences and say, "This is who I am." But the Vedic sages asked a question so profound that it shattered the foundations of ordinary human understanding. If all these things can change, then who is the one witnessing the change? The body changes constantly. The child becomes the teenager. The teenager becomes the adult. The adult becomes the elder. The face in the mirror transforms year after year. Cells die and are replaced. Your appearance changes, your voice changes, your energy changes. Yet something within you silently knows that you are still the same presence that existed years ago. When you look at an old photograph of yourself, you immediately recognize it. Not because the body is the same. It is not. Not because the personality is the same. It is not. But because there is a deeper sense of I that has remained present through every stage of life. Thoughts change, beliefs change, dreams change, goals change, friends change, emotions change. Entire identities can disappear and be replaced. A person who once seemed confident can become insecure. A person who once seemed lost can become wise. A person can completely reinvent their life. Yet there remains something that watches every transformation, something that never enters the flow of change itself. The Vedas call this deeper reality the Atman, the eternal witness, the silent observer, the unchanging awareness hidden behind every experience. Most people spend their entire lives focused on the character, while remaining unaware of the one watching the character. They become trapped inside the costume and forget the actor. They become lost in the story and forget the storyteller. Imagine watching a movie and becoming so absorbed that you forget you are sitting in a theater. You start believing every scene is happening to you. You celebrate every success. You suffer every loss. You fear every danger. This is how most people live, completely absorbed in the drama of the mind, completely identified with the temporary character they have become, never realizing that something deeper is quietly watching the entire experience. And because they mistake the temporary for the eternal, fear becomes unavoidable. Fear of aging, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of losing status, fear of losing relationships, fear of losing control, fear of death. Every fear grows from the same root, attachment to an identity that is constantly changing. The entire structure of psychological suffering begins with a single misunderstanding, the belief that you are only this temporary person moving through time, the belief that your worth depends on what happens to the character. So when life goes well, you feel valuable. When life goes badly, you feel broken. When people praise you, you feel important. When people criticize you, you feel small. Your peace rises and falls with every external event, like a leaf being carried by the wind. But the Vedas suggest something astonishing. What if the person is not what you are? What if it is simply the role you are playing? What if beneath every label, beneath every memory, beneath every thought and emotion, there exists an awareness that has never been wounded, never been diminished, and never been broken? An awareness untouched by success, untouched by failure, untouched by praise, untouched by criticism, untouched by gain, untouched by loss, untouched even by time itself. Think about it carefully. Every painful experience you have ever had was noticed by something. Every joyful moment was noticed by something. Every thought was noticed by something. Every emotion was noticed by something. That silent presence has been with you since the day you were born. It has watched every chapter of your life. It was present during your happiest moments. It was present during your darkest nights. It watched when you felt loved. It watched when you felt abandoned. It watched when you succeeded. It watched when you failed. And through it all, it remained unchanged. This is the truth that changes everything. Because the moment you begin to recognize yourself as the observer, rather than the character, something extraordinary happens. Life still unfolds. Challenges still appear. Losses still occur. People still come and go. Nothing outside necessarily changes. But your relationship with life begins to transform. You stop clinging to every passing experience as though it were your identity. You stop building your worth from things that can disappear overnight. You stop measuring yourself through the opinions of others. You stop carrying every mistake as if it defines your existence. You begin to understand that experiences happen to the character, but they do not define the awareness behind the character. And that realization creates a kind of freedom that the world cannot give and the world cannot take away. For the first time, you stop chasing an identity. For the first time, you stop trying to become enough. For the first time, you stop searching for yourself in places where you were never meant to be found. And instead, you begin turning inward toward the silent presence that has been there all along, waiting, watching, patient, unmoving, hidden beneath the noise of the world, hidden beneath years of conditioning, hidden beneath every label you have ever carried. The greatest lie ever taught was that you are only this person, and the greatest freedom begins the moment you realize you are infinitely more than that. Everything you have been searching for has been hidden inside you. One of the strangest things about being human is that almost everyone spends their entire life searching for happiness, searching for peace, searching for love, searching for meaning, searching for fulfillment, searching for something that finally makes them feel complete. From childhood, we are taught that what we need is somewhere outside of us. We are told that happiness will arrive when we achieve enough, when we earn enough, when we become successful enough, when we find the right relationship, when we receive enough approval, when life finally unfolds the way we imagined. And because of this, people spend decades running toward the future, always believing that the next achievement will finally bring peace. The next relationship will finally bring fulfillment. The next milestone will finally make them feel whole. But something strange happens. They reach the goal, and the feeling does not last. They achieve what they once desperately wanted, and after a brief moment of excitement, the old emptiness quietly returns. A person dreams of wealth, then gains wealth, and still feels restless. A person dreams of recognition, then receives recognition, and still feels incomplete. A person dreams of finding the perfect partner, then finds love and discovers that their inner dissatisfaction has followed them there as well. The outer situation changes, but the inner hunger remains, and this creates a painful cycle. People begin chasing even harder. They convince themselves that they simply need more success, more attention, more possessions, more experiences, more validation. But the Vedas reveal a truth that completely turns this way of thinking upside down. What if the problem is not that you have too little? What if the problem is that you are searching in the wrong direction? Imagine a person standing in the middle of a vast ocean, desperately searching for water. Imagine a person carrying a treasure in their pocket, while spending their entire life looking for it everywhere else. This is how the Vedic sages viewed the human condition, not as a lack of fulfillment, but as a forgetting of where fulfillment actually comes from. According to the Vedas, the deepest peace you seek is not something that can be given to you, because anything that can be given can also be taken away. Anything that depends on circumstances will eventually change. Anything that comes from the outside remains temporary. The peace described by the ancient sages is different. It does not depend on success. It does not depend on other people. It does not depend on status. It does not depend on having a perfect life. It exists beneath all of those things, like the depth of an ocean beneath the surface waves. Most people live on the surface. The waves become their entire reality. One good day makes them happy. One bad day makes them miserable. One compliment lifts them up. One criticism brings them down. Their inner state is constantly controlled by external events. But the Vedas teach that there is a deeper dimension within you that remains untouched by these constant changes. A place of stillness that exists beneath the noise. A place that has always been there, even during your most difficult moments. Think about the times in your life when you achieved something you desperately wanted. For a short period, you felt complete, you felt fulfilled, you felt at peace. But was the object itself creating that peace? Or did the mind temporarily stop searching? The Vedic sages observed something remarkable. The moment desire is fulfilled, the mind becomes quiet for a brief moment, and in that moment of quietness, the peace that already exists within you becomes visible. Then another desire appears, another goal appears, another fear appears, and the mind begins searching again. The peace disappears, not because it left, but because attention moved away from it. This is why people can spend their entire lives chasing happiness without ever finding lasting contentment. They are looking for externally what can only be discovered internally. The world teaches accumulation. The Vedas teach remembrance. The world says you must become more. The Vedas ask you to discover what you already are. The world tells you that fulfillment is waiting somewhere in the future. The Vedas whisper that fulfillment exists in this very moment, hidden beneath the restless movement of the mind. And perhaps this is why so many people feel exhausted today. Not because they are weak, but because they are searching endlessly, running endlessly, chasing endlessly, trying endlessly to arrive somewhere they believe will finally make them complete. Yet no destination ever seems to be enough. No achievement ever feels permanent. No external success completely removes the feeling that something is missing. The sages understood why. Because what is missing is not another achievement. What is missing is connection with the deepest part of yourself, the part that existed before every title, before every success, before every failure, before every identity, the part of you that is already whole, already complete, already enough. The greatest secret preserved by the Vedas is not that fulfillment exists somewhere far away. It is that what you have been searching for your entire life has been quietly waiting inside you all along. Not hidden because it is difficult to find, hidden because your attention was taught to look everywhere except where it truly exists. And the moment that attention turns inward, even for a brief moment, you begin to understand something that changes everything. You were never incomplete. You only forgot where to look. The mind was never meant to rule you. Perhaps one of the most important truths preserved by the Vedas is also one of the most forgotten. You are not your mind. At first, this may sound simple, but if deeply understood, it has the power to completely transform the way you experience life. Most people spend their entire lives believing every thought that appears in their minds. A fearful thought appears, and they become afraid. An angry thought appears, and they become angry. A negative thought appears, and it begins shaping their entire day. Without realizing it, they have given their mind complete authority over their inner world. The mind speaks, and they obey. The mind worries, and they follow. The mind creates stories, and they believe them. The mind predicts disasters, and they suffer as though those disasters have already happened. But the Vedic sages noticed something remarkable. The mind is constantly changing. It never stays still. It moves from one thought to another, one fear to another, one desire to another, one memory to another, one imagination to another, like a restless river that never stops flowing. And yet most people have built their entire identity around something that never remains the same. Think about your own life. How many thoughts have passed through your mind today? Hundreds, perhaps thousands. Some hopeful, some fearful, some useful, some completely meaningless. Many appeared for a few seconds and disappeared forever. Yet while those thoughts came and went, something remained present. Something noticed every single one of them. That silent awareness is what the Vedas invite us to discover. Because if you can observe a thought, then the thought cannot be what you are. The observer and the observed cannot be the same thing. If you can notice fear, then fear is not your deepest identity. If you can notice sadness, then sadness is not your deepest identity. If you can notice anxiety, then anxiety is not your deepest identity. These experiences may move through you, but they are not the essence of what you are. The problem is that most people never learn this distinction. From childhood, they become completely identified with the voice inside their heads. The mind says, "You are not enough," and they believe it. The mind says, "You will fail," and they believe it. The mind says, "Something terrible is going to happen," and they believe it. The mind says, "You need this person to be happy," and they believe it. Years pass, decades pass, and they remain trapped inside conversations that never stop. Conversations happening entirely within their own minds. This is why two people can experience the same situation but suffer very differently. One mind creates a prison. The other mind creates understanding. The external event is often not the source of suffering. The interpretation becomes the source of suffering. The Vedas teach that the mind is a powerful instrument, but it was never meant to become the master. Imagine a king who forgets he is the king and begins obeying one of his servants. Eventually, the servant starts making all the decisions. The kingdom falls into chaos. This is what happens when awareness forgets itself and becomes controlled by the mind. The mind is a wonderful servant. It helps you learn. It helps you communicate. It helps you solve problems. It helps you survive in the physical world. But it becomes dangerous when it takes control of your entire identity. Because the mind is never satisfied. It always wants more. More certainty, more control, more security, more approval, more pleasure, more answers. Even when one desire is fulfilled, another quickly appears. The mind is like a fire that keeps asking for more fuel, and the more fuel it receives, the stronger it becomes. This is why so many people feel exhausted. Not because life itself is exhausting, but because the mind rarely stops demanding. It constantly pulls attention away from the present moment. It drags people into the regrets of yesterday. Then it pushes them into the fears of tomorrow. Very few people ever experience the peace of simply being here, simply existing, simply witnessing life as it unfolds. Instead, they live inside endless mental noise. The Vedic sages describe this condition as a kind of sleep, not physical sleep, spiritual sleep, a state where awareness becomes so absorbed in thought that it forgets its own nature. Imagine standing beside a beautiful lake. The water is perfectly calm. Then someone throws stones into it. Ripples spread everywhere. The reflection becomes distorted. The surface becomes unclear. The lake itself has not changed. Only the disturbance on the surface has changed. The human mind works the same way. Beneath the endless movement of thought exists a natural clarity, a natural stillness, a natural peace. But because the surface is constantly disturbed by desires, fears, worries, and mental chatter, people rarely experience what lies beneath. This is why silence was so important in the ancient Vedic tradition, not because silence is magical, but because silence allows you to notice what has always been there. When the mind becomes quiet, even for a moment, something extraordinary begins to reveal itself. You start realizing that awareness exists independently of thought. You start realizing that peace is not something you create. It is something that remains when mental noise fades away. You begin seeing thoughts for what they really are: passing clouds, temporary movements, small waves appearing and disappearing within a much larger ocean. And perhaps the greatest freedom of all comes from this realization. You no longer need to fight every thought. You no longer need to believe every thought. You no longer need to fear every thought. A thought can arise without controlling you. An emotion can appear without defining you. A fear can pass through without becoming your identity. For the first time, you begin creating space between yourself and the constant activity of the mind. And within that space, something beautiful emerges: a quiet strength, a deeper intelligence, a peace that does not depend on circumstances, a freedom that cannot be taken away by changing conditions, because you finally understand something most people spend their entire lives missing. The mind was never meant to rule you. It was meant to serve you, and the moment awareness reclaims its rightful place, the prison begins to disappear. The noise begins to lose its power. The struggle begins to soften, and beneath everything, you discover the silent presence that has been watching all along. Patient, euphorne, still, unshaken, waiting for you to remember who is truly in control. You are seeing reality through a veil you cannot see. One of the deepest teachings preserved within the Vedas is that human beings rarely see reality as it truly is. They see reality through layers, layers of conditioning, layers of fear, layers of desire, layers of memory, layers of belief, layers of emotional wounds collected throughout life. Most people assume that what they see is reality itself, but the Vedic sages suggested something very different. They taught that there is a veil between human perception and truth, a veil so subtle that most people never realize it exists. Because the veil does not hide reality, it changes the way reality appears. Imagine looking through a piece of colored glass. Everything you see takes on the color of that glass. After a while, you forget the glass is even there. You assume the world itself has that color. This is exactly how the human mind operates. People do not simply see life. They see life through the lens of their conditioning. A fearful person sees danger everywhere. An insecure person sees rejection everywhere. An angry person sees enemies everywhere. A jealous person sees competition everywhere. A wounded person sees betrayal everywhere. The external world may remain exactly the same, yet the inner lens changes everything. This is why two people can experience the same situation and walk away with completely different realities. One person sees an opportunity, another sees a threat. One person sees a lesson, another sees a punishment. One person sees growth, another sees suffering. The event is the same. The perception is different, The Vedas called this veil Maya, often translated as illusion. But Maya does not mean the world is fake. It does not mean nothing exists. It means that reality is not being seen clearly. It means people mistake their interpretations for truth. They mistake appearances for reality. They mistake temporary forms for permanent existence. And because of this misunderstanding, they become trapped inside endless confusion. Think about how many times your mind has convinced you that something would make you happy forever. A promotion, a relationship, a possession, a goal, a dream. For a while, the excitement feels real. The mind becomes convinced that fulfillment is finally within reach. But eventually the excitement fades, the happiness weakens, and another desire appears, then another and another. The object changes, but the cycle remains the same. The Vedic sages observed this pattern thousands of years ago. They saw that human beings were constantly chasing shadows, not because they were foolish, but because Maya makes temporary things appear permanent. It makes changing things appear stable. It makes external things appear capable of providing lasting fulfillment. And because people believe the illusion, they spend their lives running toward mirages. Imagine a thirsty traveler crossing a desert. In the distance he sees water. He rushes toward it, but when he arrives, it disappears. It was never water. It was only a mirage. Yet from far away it looked completely real. This is how many desires operate within the human mind. The object itself is not the problem. The illusion attached to it becomes the problem. People believe, once I have this, I will finally be complete. Then they achieve it and discover that completeness cannot be found where they were searching. The Vedas teach that Maya is not only external, it also shapes the way people see themselves. Many people spend their entire lives believing they are their fears. They believe they are their failures. They believe they are their insecurities. They believe they are the labels given to them by others. Someone calls them weak, and they carry that identity for decades. Someone rejects them, and they begin seeing themselves as unworthy. Someone criticizes them, and they start questioning their value. Without realizing it, they begin living inside a version of themselves that was created by past experiences rather than truth. The veil does not only distort the world, it distorts self-perception. This is why awakening begins with seeing clearly, not creating a new reality, not escaping reality, but finally seeing reality without distortion, seeing life without the endless filters of fear, seeing people without constant judgment, seeing yourself without the stories that have been repeated for years. The Vedic sages believed that most suffering comes not from reality itself, but from the false ideas placed upon reality. Life happens, but the mind immediately begins interpreting, creating stories, creating meanings, creating fears, creating expectations. Soon the story becomes more powerful than the actual event. A small problem becomes a catastrophe. A temporary setback becomes a permanent identity. A passing emotion becomes a definition of the self, and the person becomes trapped inside a world created largely by their own perception. This is why wisdom is so powerful. Wisdom does not change reality. Wisdom changes the lens through which reality is seen, and when the lens changes, the entire world appears different. The same life, the same circumstances, the same experiences, yet a completely different understanding. Slowly, the veil begins to thin. You start noticing how often the mind exaggerates, how often it assumes, how often it predicts disaster, how often it creates suffering before suffering even arrives. You begin realizing that many of your fears were never reality. They were stories. Many of your limitations were never reality. They were beliefs. Many of your prisons were never reality. They were perceptions. And this realization creates a profound sense of freedom, because once you recognize the veil, it starts losing its power. You stop blindly believing every thought. You stop accepting every fear as truth. You stop confusing appearances with reality. Little by little, the fog begins to lift, the noise begins to settle, the illusions begin to weaken, and something extraordinary starts to happen. For the first time, you begin seeing life as it is, rather than as your conditioning says it is. You begin seeing yourself as you are, rather than as your fears say you are. You begin seeing reality without the endless layers that once distorted it. And perhaps that is what true awakening really means. Not becoming someone new, not gaining secret knowledge, not escaping the world, but finally seeing clearly what has been in front of you all along, because the greatest illusion is not that reality is hidden. The greatest illusion is believing that you are already seeing it clearly, and the moment that illusion begins to dissolve, a completely new way of living becomes possible. The moment you attach yourself to the temporary, suffering begins. One of the most misunderstood teachings of the Vedas is the teaching on attachment. Many people hear the word attachment and immediately assume it means you must stop loving people. They assume it means becoming cold, detached, emotionless, disconnected from life. But that is not what the Vedic sages taught. In fact, they understood love more deeply than most people ever do. What they warned against was not love, it was attachment. Because love and attachment are not the same thing. Love allows something to exist freely. Attachment tries to possess it. Love appreciates. Attachment clings. Love gives. Attachment demands. Love brings peace. Attachment creates fear. The moment your happiness becomes dependent on something temporary, suffering quietly enters your life. And this happens far more often than people realize. Many people become attached to relationships, not because they truly love, but because they fear being alone. Many become attached to money, not because they need it, but because they believe it defines their worth. Many become attached to success, not because they enjoy growth, but because they fear feeling insignificant. Many become attached to their image, their reputation, their status, their achievements, their opinions, their identity. And because everything in the world is constantly changing, attachment guarantees inner instability. The Vedas observed a simple truth. Anything that begins can end. Anything that appears can disappear. Anything that is gained can be lost. Everything in the visible world exists within the flow of change. Relationships change, bodies change, careers change, circumstances change, people change. Even the things that seem permanent eventually transform. Yet human beings continue building their sense of self upon things that cannot last forever. And this is where suffering begins. Imagine building a house on moving sand. No matter how beautiful the house becomes, instability remains beneath it. The problem is not the house. The problem is the foundation. This is how most people live. They build their peace on unstable foundations. Then they wonder why anxiety constantly follows them. They build their identity on temporary things. Then they wonder why fear never leaves. Deep inside, the mind already knows the truth. It knows that everything external can change. And because it knows this, it lives in constant fear of loss. This fear becomes visible in countless ways. People fear rejection because they have attached their worth to acceptance. People fear failure because they have attached their identity to success. People fear aging because they have attached themselves to the body. People fear endings because they have attached themselves to permanence. The object of attachment changes, but the mechanism remains the same. The Vedic sages saw this clearly. They noticed that suffering often arrives long before loss itself. A person becomes attached. Then fear appears. The fear of losing what they love. The fear of losing what they possess. The fear of losing what they have built. The fear of losing what they believe they need. Eventually they stop enjoying what they have because they are too busy worrying about losing it. This is one of attachment's greatest tricks. It steals the present moment. It prevents people from fully experiencing life. A relationship becomes anxiety. Success becomes pressure. Possessions become responsibility. Achievements become expectations. Instead of bringing freedom, attachment turns blessings into burdens. The Vedas compare this to holding water in a closed fist. The tighter you squeeze, the more water escapes. The harder you cling to life, the more fearful life becomes. The harder you cling to people, the more insecurity appears. The harder you cling to outcomes, the more anxiety grows. Because life was never designed to be controlled, it was designed to be experienced. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop trying to own what was never yours to own. Think about a beautiful sunset. You can admire it, love it, appreciate it, be grateful for it, but you cannot possess it. The moment you try to hold it forever, suffering begins. The sages taught that every experience in life is similar. Relationships are gifts, not possessions. Success is an experience, not an identity. The body is a vehicle, not the self. The world is something to participate in, not something to cling to. This understanding creates an entirely different way of living. You begin loving more deeply because fear no longer controls your love. You begin appreciating people more because you stop trying to own them. You become more present because you stop constantly worrying about the future. You become more grateful because you stop demanding permanence from temporary things. Ironically, the less tightly you cling to life, the more fully you experience it. And this is where one of the greatest paradoxes of the Vedas appears. People believe attachment creates closeness, but often attachment creates fear. Freedom creates closeness, because freedom allows love to breathe. Freedom allows appreciation to grow. Freedom removes the constant pressure that attachment creates. The Vedic sages understood that true peace does not come from possessing everything. It comes from needing less, not because life becomes smaller, but because your inner stability becomes stronger. You no longer need the world to behave perfectly in order to feel complete. You no longer need every person to stay forever. You no longer need every outcome to unfold exactly as planned. A deeper trust begins to emerge, a trust in life itself, a trust in change, a trust in the flow of existence. You begin understanding something that most people spend their entire lives resisting. Change is not the enemy. Change is the nature of the world. The suffering comes not from change itself. The suffering comes from demanding that what changes should remain the same. The tree loses its leaves. The seasons shift. The river continues flowing. The sun rises and sets. Everything in existence participates in change. Yet human beings often expect their own lives to remain fixed. And because reality never agrees to this demand, frustration appears. The Vedas invite us into a different relationship with life, a relationship based not on possession, but participation, not on clinging, but appreciating, not on fear, but trust, not on attachment, but understanding. You can still love deeply. You can still dream greatly. You can still build meaningful relationships. You can still pursue success, but you stop making these things the source of your identity. You stop asking temporary things to provide permanent security. You stop searching for eternity inside what was always meant to change. And in that moment, something extraordinary happens. Life becomes lighter. The fear begins to soften. The anxiety begins to loosen its grip. The heart becomes less burdened, not because you own more, but because you finally understand that peace was never found through possession. It was found through freedom. The moment you attach yourself to the temporary, suffering begins. But the moment you learn to appreciate without clinging, to love without possessing, and to experience without becoming dependent, a different kind of life becomes possible. A life where peace no longer depends on what stays, because it is rooted in something deeper than anything that can leave. The secret connection that binds every living thing. One of the most beautiful truths preserved by the Vedas is the idea that separation is not as real as it appears. At first glance, the world seems divided into countless pieces. Different people, different nations, different religions, different cultures, different lives, different struggles, different dreams. Everywhere we look, we see separation. We see me and you, we and they, ours and theirs. The human mind naturally creates boundaries. It labels, it categorizes, it divides. And because of this, most people spend their entire lives feeling isolated from the rest of existence. They feel separate from nature, separate from others, separate from life itself, and perhaps most painfully, separate from the deeper part of their own being. But the Vedic sages saw something very different. When they looked beyond appearances, they discovered a hidden unity beneath all diversity. They realized that while forms may appear different, the essence behind those forms remains the same. Imagine standing beside the ocean. You see thousands of waves moving across the surface. Some are large, some are small, some rise high, some disappear quickly. Every wave appears separate. Each has its own shape, its own movement, its own story. Yet every wave is made of the same ocean. The wave may appear separate for a moment, but it never truly leaves the ocean. The Vedas teach that human beings are very much the same. At the surface level, we appear separate. Different bodies, different names, different personalities, different experiences. But beneath all these temporary forms exists the same universal consciousness, the same source of life expressing itself through countless individual forms. This understanding completely changes the way you see the world, because when you believe you are completely separate, fear becomes natural, competition becomes natural, comparison becomes natural, conflict becomes natural. You begin viewing life as a struggle between isolated individuals trying to survive. Everyone becomes a rival, everyone becomes a threat, everyone becomes someone you must compete against, and this creates endless suffering. The Vedic sages understood that much of humanity's pain comes from this illusion of separation. When people feel disconnected, they become afraid. When they become afraid, they become defensive. When they become defensive, they create division, and division creates even more suffering. This pattern repeats itself across entire societies, across families, across relationships, across generations. The world becomes fragmented because people forget their deeper connection. But something remarkable happens when this understanding begins to awaken. You start seeing others differently. You begin realizing that every person you meet is carrying hopes, fears, dreams, and struggles just like you. The person who appears strong may be fighting silent battles. The person who appears successful may be carrying invisible pain. The person who seems difficult may be suffering in ways you cannot see. Suddenly, compassion begins to emerge naturally. Not because someone tells you to be compassionate, but because you recognize yourself in others. You see that beneath different personalities, the same longing exists. Everyone wants peace. Everyone wants love. Everyone wants meaning. Everyone wants freedom from suffering. The external stories may differ, but the deeper human experience remains surprisingly similar. The Vedas take this insight even further. They suggest that the connection extends beyond humanity itself. It includes animals, plants, forests, mountains, rivers, the earth, the stars, the entire universe. Everything participates in one vast interconnected reality. Nothing exists completely alone. Think about your own life. The air you breathe comes from trees. The food you eat comes from the earth. The knowledge you possess came from countless people before you. The language you speak was shaped by generations. Your existence depends upon relationships you did not create. Every aspect of life is interconnected. Even modern science continues revealing what ancient sages intuitively understood. Everything influences everything else. Nothing exists in complete isolation, and yet the human ego constantly whispers a different story. It says you are alone. It says you must carry everything by yourself. It says you are disconnected from others. It says you are separate from life. This illusion creates enormous loneliness. Perhaps that is why so many people today feel disconnected, despite being surrounded by others. They have forgotten the deeper connection that already exists. The Vedas remind us that true connection is not something you create. It is something you recognize. It has always been there, hidden beneath the illusion of separation. Consider a tree standing alone in a field. From above the ground, it appears independent, self-contained, separate from everything around it. But beneath the surface, its roots are connected to soil, water, microorganisms, and entire underground networks that support its life. What appears separate is actually connected in ways that are not immediately visible. Human beings are much the same. At the surface, we appear separate, but beneath the surface, invisible connections bind us together, emotionally, spiritually, energetically, existentially. The Vedic sages believed that awakening begins when these hidden connections become visible. When you stop seeing life as isolated fragments, when you stop viewing yourself as a separate entity struggling against the universe, when you begin understanding that you are not outside life, you are part of it. You are not disconnected from existence. You are an expression of it. This realization changes how you treat people. It changes how you respond to conflict. It changes how you approach nature. It changes how you view yourself. Because harming others starts feeling like harming a part of yourself. Compassion becomes less of a moral duty and more of a natural response. Kindness becomes easier. Forgiveness becomes easier. Understanding becomes easier. Not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because the illusion of absolute separation begins to weaken. The walls created by the ego start becoming transparent. The boundaries that once seemed permanent begin dissolving, and in their place emerges something beautiful, a sense of belonging, a sense of connection, a sense of participation in something far greater than your individual story. For the first time, you stop feeling like a stranger in the universe. You stop feeling abandoned by life. You stop feeling isolated within your own existence. Instead, you begin sensing that you have always been connected, always been supported, always been part of something immense and mysterious. The Vedas teach that this hidden unity is not a belief. It is a reality waiting to be discovered, a reality hidden beneath appearances, a reality hidden beneath division, a reality hidden beneath the endless noise of the mind. And perhaps one of the greatest truths ever preserved is this: you are not a separate wave fighting against the ocean. You are the ocean expressing itself as a wave, for a brief moment, in a unique form, with a unique story, but never truly separate from the vast source from which you came. The secret connection that binds every living thing has always been there. The only thing that was missing was the ability to see it. What dies is not what you truly are. There is one fear that quietly lives beneath almost every other fear: the fear of death. People fear failure because they fear losing a part of themselves. People fear rejection because they fear emotional loss. People fear aging because it reminds them that time is moving forward. People fear uncertainty because it reminds them that nothing can be controlled forever. If you look deeply enough, many fears eventually lead back to the same question: what will happen to me? What happens when everything ends? What happens when this life is over? For thousands of years, human beings have wrestled with this mystery. Empires have risen and fallen. Civilizations have appeared and disappeared. Generations have lived entire lives searching for answers. Yet despite all human progress, death remains one of the greatest mysteries of existence. Most people avoid thinking about it. They distract themselves. They stay busy. They focus on daily concerns, anything to avoid confronting the reality that one day everything they know will change. But the Vedic sages did something very different. Instead of running from the question, they turned toward it. They looked directly into one of humanity's deepest fears, and what they discovered transformed the way they understood life itself. The Vedas teach that the fear of death comes from a misunderstanding of identity. If you believe you are only the body, then death appears terrifying. If you believe you are only your personality, then death appears like annihilation. If you believe you are only your memories, achievements, relationships, and possessions, then death appears to take everything away. But the sages asked a profound question: what if the thing you fear losing is not what you truly are? Think back to the first chapter. The body changes constantly. The child disappears and becomes the teenager. The teenager disappears and becomes the adult. The adult slowly becomes someone entirely different from who they once were. Yet throughout all these changes, Something remains present. Something witnesses every stage. Something watches the body change without changing itself. The Vedas call this the Atman, the eternal self, the silent witness, the unchanging awareness behind every experience. According to the ancient sages, death affects the body, but not the awareness that observes the body. Just as changing clothes does not change the person wearing them, changing forms does not affect the deeper essence of consciousness. Whether one accepts this teaching literally or symbolically, its message carries immense power, because it shifts attention away from what changes and toward what remains. The sages observed something fascinating. Everything in nature moves through cycles. The sun rises and sets. The seasons come and go. Leaves appear and fall. Flowers bloom and fade. Day becomes night. Night becomes day. Nothing remains fixed. Everything transforms. And yet, transformation is not destruction. Winter does not destroy spring. Spring does not destroy summer. Each phase becomes part of a larger cycle. The Vedas suggest that life itself may operate according to a similar principle, that what appears to be an ending may be part of a process far larger than the human mind can easily understand. One of the greatest sources of suffering comes from believing that endings are absolute. When something ends, people often feel as though reality itself has collapsed. A relationship ends, a chapter ends, a dream ends, a career ends, a period of life ends, and immediately the mind labels it a loss. But the sages noticed that endings often become the doorway to transformations that could never happen otherwise. The seed must disappear before the tree can emerge. The caterpillar must disappear before the butterfly can appear. The old identity must dissolve before a new one can be born. Life continuously moves through death and rebirth, even within a single lifetime. The person you were 10 years ago no longer exists, yet you do. The beliefs you once held may no longer exist, yet you do. Entire versions of yourself have disappeared over the years, yet something remains, something continues, something witnesses every transformation. This realization begins changing the way you view death itself. Instead of seeing it as the enemy of life, you begin seeing it as part of life's mystery, part of life's movement, part of the endless rhythm through which existence expresses itself. The Vedic sages believed that fear of death often prevents people from truly living. People become so afraid of losing life that they forget to experience it. They become so afraid of the future that they miss the present. They become so concerned with preserving themselves that they stop growing. The fear of death creates a smaller life, but understanding death creates a deeper life. Because when you stop viewing every ending as a catastrophe, you begin living with greater freedom. You become less afraid to change, less afraid to grow, less afraid to let go, less afraid to follow truth. You stop clinging so tightly to temporary things. You stop treating every loss as the end of your story. And perhaps most importantly, you stop wasting precious moments worrying about things that have not happened. The sages taught that awareness of mortality should not create despair. It should create clarity. It should remind you how precious each moment truly is, how temporary every experience is, how valuable every connection is. When you deeply understand that life is not permanent, gratitude naturally grows. You begin appreciating ordinary moments. A conversation, a sunrise, a quiet evening, the presence of someone you love. Things once taken for granted become sacred, because you realize nothing lasts forever. Ironically, accepting impermanence often creates greater peace than resisting it. The person who accepts change flows with life. The person who resists change constantly struggles against reality. The Vedas invite us to trust something deeper than the changing world. Not the body, not the personality, not external circumstances, but the silent awareness that remains present through every experience, the awareness that watched your childhood, the awareness that watches your adulthood, the awareness reading these words right now. That presence has been with you through every joy, every heartbreak, every success, every disappointment, every chapter. and according to the sages, it remains untouched by the endless changes occurring around it. This does not mean death stops being mysterious. It remains one of existence's greatest mysteries, but the mystery begins replacing fear. Wonder begins replacing anxiety. Trust begins replacing resistance, because you realize that life is far larger than the small story the mind tells itself. Far larger than one chapter, far larger than one identity, far larger than one lifetime. And perhaps that is the hidden gift contained within the Vedic understanding of death. It reminds you that what is temporary should be appreciated, what is changing should be honored, and what is eternal should be remembered. Because the deepest truth is not that the body will live forever. The deepest truth is that what you truly are cannot be reduced to the body alone. Forms change, names change, stories change. Eyes, energy to Morka. Worlds change. Everything visible eventually transforms. But the silent awareness behind the experience remains. Watching, witnessing, unmoving, present, just as it always has been. And when this realization finally begins to sink into the heart, something extraordinary happens. The fear that once controlled life starts losing its grip. The anxiety surrounding endings begins to soften, and for the first time you understand why the sages spoke of death not as the opposite of life, but as part of a much greater mystery, because what dies is not what you truly are. The one truth they could never completely erase. After everything we have explored, we arrive at the heart of the ancient Vedic message, the truth beneath all other truths, the realization hidden beneath every teaching, the understanding that countless sages spent their lives trying to express, not because it was complicated, but because it was so simple that the human mind often overlooks it. The Vedas preserved many teachings. They spoke about consciousness. They spoke about the mind. They spoke about suffering. They spoke about attachment. They spoke about life and death. But all of these teachings ultimately point toward one central realization, a realization so powerful that if truly understood, it changes the way you see yourself, other people, and reality itself. It is the truth that no empire could destroy, no institution could completely erase, no period of history could fully bury, because it does not exist inside a book. It does not belong to a religion. It does not belong to a culture. It does not belong to a particular group of people. It exists within the deepest part of every human being. The Vedic sages expressed this truth through one of the most famous declarations ever spoken. Tat Tvamasi, you are that. 3 simple words, yet perhaps among the most profound words ever uttered. For most of life, people live as though they are separate from the source of existence. They search for meaning. They search for God. They search for truth. They search for peace. They search for fulfillment, always imagining that what they seek exists somewhere else, somewhere distant, somewhere outside themselves, somewhere they have not yet reached. The Vedas challenge this entire way of thinking. They suggest that what you are searching for is not separate from you. The deepest reality of existence is not somewhere else. It is closer than your own breath, closer than your own thoughts, closer than your own identity. The problem is not distance. The problem is recognition. Imagine spending your entire life searching for a treasure while standing directly above it. Imagine searching the world for a key while holding it in your hand. This is how the sages described the human condition. People search endlessly for what already exists within them, not because they are foolish, but because their attention has been trained outward since childhood. From the moment people enter the world, they are taught to focus externally. External success, external approval, external status, external possessions, external achievements. The world constantly points attention outward. Very few people are ever taught to turn inward. Very few are encouraged to investigate the one who is searching, the one who is thinking, the one who is experiencing, the one who is aware. And because of this, many people spend their entire lives searching without ever reaching the destination. The Vedic sages discovered something extraordinary. The seeker and the sought are not separate. The one searching for truth is made of the same essence as the truth itself. The wave searching for the ocean is already made of the ocean. The ray searching for the sun is already part of the sun. The drop searching for water is already water. This understanding changes everything because it ends the endless feeling of separation, the feeling that something is missing, the feeling that fulfillment exists somewhere in the future, the feeling that you must become someone else before you can be whole. The Vedas teach that your deepest nature is already whole, not because you are perfect, not because your life is perfect, not because you have all the answers, but because what you truly are exists beneath all imperfections, beneath all fears, beneath all confusion, beneath all temporary identities. Most people spend years trying to improve the character, trying to perfect the story, trying to become worthy, trying to become enough. But the sages asked a different question. What if the awareness behind the character is already enough? What if the deepest part of you was never broken? What if it never needed fixing? What if it never needed completion? What if it was complete from the very beginning? This is one of the most revolutionary ideas preserved by the Vedas, because a person who discovers this truth begins living differently. They stop searching for worth in the opinions of others. They stop building their identity from temporary achievements. They stop depending on constant validation. They stop believing every fearful thought. They stop measuring themselves against everyone around them, not because they become superior, but because they become free. Freedom is what naturally emerges when you remember your deeper nature. A person who knows their value does not constantly beg for approval. A person who knows their inner completeness does not desperately chase every desire. A person who understands their connection to existence does not live in constant fear. This is why the ancient sages considered self-realization the highest form of knowledge. Not knowledge about the world, but knowledge about the self, because every external achievement eventually fades. Every possession eventually changes hands. Every title eventually disappears. Every reputation eventually vanishes. Every identity eventually transforms. But understanding who you truly are changes the foundation of your entire life. The Vedas repeatedly return to the same insight. Human suffering is not caused by a lack of truth. It is caused by forgetting truth. People suffer because they forget their deeper nature. They suffer because they identify with what changes and ignore what remains. They suffer because they mistake the temporary for the eternal, and this forgetting creates a life of endless searching. The sages understood that awakening is not about becoming something new. It is about remembering something ancient, something that has always been present, something that existed before every label you ever carried, before every fear, before every success, before every failure, before every story you told yourself about who you are. The truth was never absent, only hidden. Hidden beneath noise, hidden beneath conditioning, hidden beneath distraction, hidden beneath the endless activity of the mind. And this is why no one could completely erase it, because it is not stored in books alone. It is not protected by temples alone. It is not preserved by traditions alone. It exists within human consciousness itself. Again and again throughout history, people rediscover it. Again and again, someone looks beyond appearances and sees it. Again and again, someone becomes quiet enough to hear it. The truth survives because it is woven into existence itself. It waits patiently beneath the surface of every human life, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be recognized, waiting to be lived. Perhaps that is why these teachings continue to resonate thousands of years later. Because they are not merely ancient ideas, they point toward something timeless, something beyond history, something beyond culture, something beyond belief, something that can only be discovered directly. And perhaps, after all this time, that is the one truth they could never completely erase. You are not merely a temporary person moving through a temporary world. You are not simply your fears. You are not simply your thoughts. You are not simply your successes or failures. You are not simply the story you have been telling yourself. Beneath all of that exists something vast, something silent, something eternal, something that has been with you through every chapter of your life, watching, witnessing, present, Aine Hafisni, unchanging, and the moment you begin recognizing that presence, the entire journey starts to make sense. Because the greatest secret preserved by the Vedas was never about gaining something new. It was about remembering what you have always been. The truth was never lost, only forgotten, and perhaps right now, it is beginning to remember itself through you.